First of all, on our website, the evolutionaryastrology.net, you can listen to our free weekly podcasts. You can subscribe to our Astro Library. You can become a registered student with our multimedia courses, and you can even pursue certification with us if you would like. We also, a little more detail on that Astro Library. We currently are running everything that you see on your screen 25% off. I think that deadline is tomorrow. So you have about 24 more hours if you are interested in the 25% reduction. And as we start going through this Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, I've been referring back to my outer planet workshop on Pluto in Capricorn that I did back in 2012, I think it was. And you can see on your screen that's included in section 1. It is also included in section 3. So if you want to pursue anything that we're going to go through tonight in more detail, I can definitely recommend the Pluto and Capricorn outer planet workshop series. We took 13 weeks, 26 hours to go through it, and we go in depth through Pluto's transit in each of the 12 houses. Here are the 3 segments of our multimedia course that we offer right now. And as you can see, you get DVDs, a transcript, access to 250 hours of audio classes. I have taught the first 10 years of working with EAN. We are now moving segment 1 and segment 2 into monthly webinar classes. So, Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. This is actually some satellite passing or getting close or trying to. This is actually a photo of Pluto and 3 of its moons. I don't know if it's Sharon or Sharon or Sharon or whatever it is. I'm going to call it Sharon. That was the first moon discovered around Pluto, and it's half the size of Pluto. And in the 80s, when Jeffrey Wolf Green was doing this teaching, he used to say that Pluto and its moon, at that time we only thought there was one moon, Pluto and its moon represented that dual desire nature of the soul. At this point, we've discovered 5 moons around Pluto. The latest one was in 2012, and I don't know if it's been named yet. Just briefly, I'll show you this slide again. Pluto retrograde April 14th. And it goes direct September 22nd. Those slower outer moving planets, it's hard to pay attention to their shadows like we do with Mercury, Venus, and Mars, but I was curious, and so I put it in there. And as you can see, the first time Pluto went over 11 Cap, which is where it's going to go direct in September, was back on Christmas Eve 2013. And then it will move out of shadow if you really want to look at that, where it is right now today. It'll come back to that spot January 12th. Those shadows go outside of the Sun conjunctions to Pluto. So I've never paid much attention to it, but I was curious prepping for this class, so I thought I'd bring it up. We'll look at these dates again later. Also, just the visual of how that apparent phenomena of a planetary retrograde looks from planet Earth. This is how it works with any of the outer planets. Whenever we do have Mars through Pluto retrograde, they are closest to Earth versus being over here on the other side of the Sun, which is when they make their annual conjunction. Right here, when we have this lineup, is when, if you're following my aerials, this is when Pluto retrograde will oppose the Sun, which is always the highlight of any outer planet retrograde cycle. So just a visual of what this looks like. In other words, the Earth's orbit around the Sun's is basically overtakes the outer planet. And that's how it creates that phenomenon. Here's a little bit of astronomy about Pluto. This revolution around the Sun, 248 and almost a half years. Its revolution around the zodiac is exactly the same because it is so far away from the Sun. It appears the same around the Sun and the zodiac, which is us on planet Earth. Mean motion is only 15 seconds per day. Now that varies a little bit when it's retrograde, but averaging it out over a year, you can see that it moves very, very slowly. Pluto, because of its elliptical orbit, I'll explain that a little bit later. I think it varies somewhere. Don't take this as gospel. Somewhere, let's just say between 1.5 and 4 degrees, depending on how fast it's moving in a year. It is retrograde 5 months out of the year, 160 days to be exact. So it's retrograde 44% of the time. It's stationary periods, meaning right now, as it's just turned stationary direct, it's a 7-day period where it appears to stand still. So we're 3.5 days through that stationary period right now. When it turns stationary direct, same thing. It'll seem to stand still in the sky 7 days. And that's really when we can notice those outer unconscious planets, when they are standing still, retrograde or direct in the sky. In 2006, the IAU reclassified Pluto down to a dwarf planet. It is the largest object discovered to date in the Kuiper Belt, I don't know how to pronounce it. You know, that's my joke pronunciation. The Kuiper Belt is what exists beyond Neptune's orbit. They're finding more and more stuff out there. That's where Sedna is. That's where Eris is. And I suspect we're going to find more objects around that Kuiper Belt as well. Those planets are made up almost all of rock and ice. The ice is different gases in addition to just water. Now Pluto is the 10th most massive body going around the sun. And some of you might be aware of the fact that while most of the planets in the solar system travel within a 16-degree belt around the ecliptic, the sun's apparent path, 8 degrees above and below the ecliptic, Pluto goes about 23, 24 degrees. It's much more tilted in its orbit around the sun. And because it's so elliptical, it doesn't spend the same amount of time in each of the signs, and I'll explain that a little later on. But what we have is Pluto will appear to go within Neptune's orbit. Now, they don't ever crash because Pluto's so elliptical at such an angle. They don't ever match up physically in the sky. There's just an appearance of that. If you were looking at from on top, looking down at the sun and looking at all the planets going around, Pluto would appear to go within Neptune's orbit. And it does that. It varies. It's never in the same sign. It varies how many years it's within Neptune's orbit. I just listed the last time for any of you who might be curious about those dates, and you can look up the astrological signs if you want. Again, Pluto has 5 moons to date, and the largest one, Sharon, is just over half the size of Pluto. And so what they're starting to recognize is that Pluto and Sharon are more like a binary system, moving around each other. And the IAU has not yet created a formal definition for a binary dwarf planet, and Pluto and Sharon are the only one we know of so far. And so again, Jeffrey Green always thought that this was representative of the dual desire nature within the soul, the separating desires, the returning desires. I told you Pluto has 248 years around the zodiac. It is not the same in each sign. Its shortest distance is through Scorpio. Its shortest time, excuse me, is through Scorpio. Its longest is through Taurus, and this is pretty steady with this right here, okay? And so I wrote down the average number of years Pluto will spend in each of the signs. As you can see, we can all pretty much relate to Pluto in Scorpio. That was 12 years. Pluto in Sag, 13. Pluto in Capricorn, that we're in the midst of now, is 15 years, 2008 to 2023-24. When it goes into Aquarius, it'll be there 19 years, 25 years in a Pisces. We could ponder over that one for a long time, but isn't it interesting that the sign that it rules is its shortest transit? Now, I'm not an expert in mythology, but I decided I would put in just a couple sentences for you. Pluto is also known as Hades, and of course Pluto rules the underworld, which is Hades. And many of you might know of the myth with Personifi. Help me out with this one, Leroy. I am not pronouncing words today.
Persephone. Persephone, Kim.
Persephone. Oh, I'm glad. I have too many planets in Sag in the 9th house, which is a lot of the different languages, and this is my joke. I could.
That's what you have Media Monk for.
Okay, thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
my 3rd house, Pluto, opposite of all that 9th house Sag energy. So there's many, interpretations of the myth with Persephone and Pluto. And basically, he kidnapped her, raped her, keeps her underground, and then made a rule to let her come above the underground so many months out of the year, and that's how Pluto has a relationship as a fertility god, as much as the god of death and rebirth. There are many more astrologers out there who know a lot more about mythology than me. I don't claim to have any expertise in this area, but I just wanted to put it in, and that's one of the most famous sculptures of Pluto in the background. Now, the Pluto archetype from the perspective of evolutionary astrology is pretty easy to understand. It represents the concept of what we know as the soul. The soul is that immutable consciousness that exists from life to life. And as it goes through these lifetimes of incarnations, the soul expands in consciousness or awareness or wisdom or understanding. And in EA, we have an observation correlation of souls. And we have come to recognize that not all souls exist at the same level of awareness. And we call these different levels of conscious awareness the evolutionary states. And there is a dimly evolved, de-evolved to this, but for tonight's purposes, I like to just loosely approximate it. Consensus, any country, any race, anybody on the planet, approximately 7 out of 10 people are consensus. They follow the Saturnian rules. They do not think outside the space-time they were born into. They are a product of their environment and their environmental conditionings. Individuating is where we're breaking free from consensus. That's approximately 2 out of 10 souls on the planet, learning to think for ourselves, busting out of consensus religions and societal rules and norms. What do I think is the truth? And then we have approximately 1 out of 10 souls on planet today spirituated. Understanding, a consciousness that is expanded to such a degree they can understand universal and timeless principles. Natural spiritual laws and principles are what we call in EA natural law, which is always, of course, found in nature. Now, I told you, looking at Pluto and its moon, Sharon, that in EA the soul is observed to have a dual nature, dual desire nature, separating desires, returning desires. So within all of us is a desire to separate from that which created us, or that desire to incarnate into a physical body. I am, I exist, I'm here. And when we come into this physical realm, these separating desires is actually what keeps us spinning into the physical world so many times, or spinning on that karma wheel or hamster wheel, as the Eastern philosophers like to say. Separating desires consist of anything and everything that we want to bring into manifestation. And some things we don't want to manifest. But simple ones: job, lover, house, clothes, etc. And again, in natural law, all souls go through countless lifetimes exhausting that separating desire nature. Eventually, the desire to know why we're here becomes a curiosity, and as we exhaust the separating desires, it eventually becomes the only desire left, to know source energy again. There is one returning desire, to know source. Natal Pluto, by house, sign, and aspects, represents what EA calls that karmic dynamic, or this is where any soul will gravitate to for unconscious emotional security. And if we look at Pluto by sign natally, it's the generation we're born into. Opposite sign is the generational lessons. And then when we look at Pluto by house, it is where we are coming from as an individual soul. Again, where we are gravitating to for security purposes. And that individual, or that opposite house natally, is the individual lessons. Now we're going to be concentrating more on transiting Pluto. And so, all right, I just lost my screen. All right, hold on everybody. Sorry about that. I don't know if that was me or not. So apologies for that. I didn't think I touched anything. What we're going to be working with more though is transiting Pluto and Pluto through Capricorn. But when we look at the transit of Pluto by sign and house, this is the current environment through which our soul is evolving our natal Pluto archetype. So those soul lessons we came in with are evolved through transiting Pluto. They're also evolved by progressed in solar arc Pluto as well, if you want to expand in that direction to looking at it in more advanced levels. When we look at transiting Pluto by sign, it is going to represent both generational and individual lessons that we are all in process of learning. And when we take that transiting Pluto by sign and put it into the house it's transiting, those are going to represent the individual lessons. Now here again, as we start moving into this, I want to speak a bit about Pluto retrograde, because when we get into Pluto and Capricorn, everything we talk about, I want you to recognize that's also the lessons retrograde as well. So just to remind you one more time, we on planet Earth will look at any planetary cycle with how it relates to the sun. That's called a synodic cycle. It's been expanded, the word synodic has been expanded to mean the cycle of any two planets to each other. All right, so you'll hear it interchangeably between the sun and any planet, or any two planets as a planetary pair. So we can look at this sun cycle with Pluto as starting on January 1st of this year, 11/17 Capricorn, and it goes through January 3rd of next year, where it rebirths again at 13 Capricorn. Pluto, as we said earlier, is going retrograde today, April 14th, 2014, at 13.5 degrees Capricorn. Highlight of the retrograde is July 4th, 12/17, Sun Cancer, Pluto Capricorn, and then Pluto goes direct September 22nd. So that week time period, Pluto retrograde, Pluto direct, this is when it's the most intense. And so what happens during those time periods? What does that mean? As we look at this Pluto retrograde cycle, remember, it's retrograde approximately 5 months per year, or about 44% of the time. And so you can look at this as Pluto retrograde natally, this slide, and you can also look at this as working for all of us on planet Earth as the Pluto transit is retrograde April through September. When Pluto is retrograde, that means we're not buying into the status quo. We are going to question everything about our soul relative to our evolutionary state, consensus individuating, spirituating, and our environmental conditionings. What race, culture, country, belief system, societal, parental environment we're born into. And Pluto retrograde will turn us inward because we're not buying into the norm. So it turns us inward and it causes us to withdraw somewhat from external activities and go, wait a minute, what does this mean for me? So this Pluto turning stationary retrograde is a classic time period to be recognizing the desires that no longer satisfy our soul. Remember, we have all these separating desires we're going through the process of exhausting. We have a desire, we achieve it, we have a momentary sense of satisfaction, and then it's followed by dissatisfaction, which leads us to a new separating desire. And we repeat it all over again. Eventually exhausting those separating desires again, that desire to know source becomes stronger. So when Pluto turns retrograde, and through its retrograde cycle, this is where we have dissatisfaction with these separating desires, and it's intensified a little bit. This is also where we have the opportunity to embrace that returning desire to know source. Also, in general, when Pluto is retrograde, as the soul breaks free from that status quo, it must find its own definition to itself, to its desires, to its world, to everything that it is in process of evolving through. So it's breaking free from those collective definitions and those collective pressures. Can you just see from this right here, Capricorn, all of the pressure to conform to society? Can you see how Pluto retrograde just in and of itself creates societal rebellion? How are you doing it? Just reflect on your life for a moment. And one of the other things that happens, and this is true for all planetary retrogrades as well, all right? Pluto retrograde means that it prohibits stagnation, non-growth, crystallization, because all souls have a desire to be secure. That's why we get so stuck in those separating desires, because this is my job, this is my house, this is my family, this is my partner, this is my world. I exist, I'm physical. And so we can get quite stuck in our securities. So the retrograde is where we throw off that energy and work to accelerate the evolutionary process. And that acceleration of evolution takes place on all evolutionary states, consensus, individuating, spirituating. It is part of the process that allows us to naturally evolve from consensus to individuating and spirituating states of awareness. So Pluto retrograde emphasizes the returning desires in the soul. Helps accelerate the elimination of those separating desires. And again, as we talked about, that sense of cyclic or perpetual dissatisfaction is deeper than when Pluto is direct. So if you were born with Pluto retrograde, this is a lifetime process of dissatisfaction. Doesn't mean you don't achieve any goals or desires. You do. But there is a more increased sense of dissatisfaction. Your soul is trying to accelerate its evolution. And then again, when we have transiting Pluto, all of us are experiencing on a temporary basis an increased level of dissatisfaction within our soul, and we want to evolve. So remember this, as we're working through now Pluto in Capricorn, this retrograde archetype means we are trying to throw off all of these Pluto in Capricorn archetypes. I'm going to take a drink of water just a moment, thank you. Last webinar I didn't have my mic turned up, and I apologize for that. I usually have it turned up all the time, and my niece had borrowed my mic and had it turned down, so thank you for allowing me to swallow water. So Pluto in Capricorn. This is where we're merging the archetypes of Pluto and Saturn, Scorpio and Capricorn, 8th house, 10th house. What it is the soul and its structure of consciousness. Saturn, Capricorn in the 10th in evolutionary astrology relates to the structure of consciousness, the individuated consciousness, how we make sense of our space-time world. We know Pluto as being that archetype of death and rebirth. When we've exhausted a separating desire, it dies off, replaced by a new one typically. That's why Pluto is known in traditional astrology as death and rebirth. Now, Pluto destroys all of the outworn structures in our consciousness in Capricorn. 15 years of this. And it destroys any crystallized forms, structures that no longer serve our soul on an individual basis and that no longer serve us on a collective basis. Collective being a culture, a nation, a species as human. You can take it all as broad as you want on a collective basis. Now, because Capricorn is yin energy, energy moving back to center, it brings in what is known as reflection and involution. As these outer forms are breaking down, it turns us inward. We involute, and we search to become aware of what are the inner dynamics that create the outer stuff. Capricorn is the third earth sign, so what's the inner motivations in regards to that earth dynamic, which traditionally is career? But deeper than that is self-determination, self-responsibility. So it draws us inward to figure out the whys, Pluto, of everything in our outer world that's no longer working, and what we want to replace it with, how we are going to recreate that outer world. Pluto in Capricorn is where we question what constitutes real inner security. This is where we're reaching over to the Cancer polarity and the emotional maturation process. And so anytime Pluto goes retrograde in Capricorn, it points over to Cancer and emotional maturation. And you can look to the opposite house where you have your Pluto Capricorn transit. And that opposite house is where you have emotional maturation, emotional self-reliance lessons within your soul. Pluto in Capricorn is where we review value systems with regard to standards of right, wrong conduct. and their judgments. In other words, Capricorn Saturn in the 10th house is the archetype of society. And it's how society puts together its rules, its customs, its norms, its taboos. It's how society puts everything together in order to function as any group. And so if we deviate from those rules, we are conditioned by society to feel guilty. We're not conforming to what the authority figures say we should be doing, how we should be acting. So when Pluto goes retrograde in Capricorn, this is intensified. We are questioning right, wrong, and we're questioning conditioned guilt within our own soul. We are questioning how our society, whatever society we are participating in, we are questioning how that is put together, how it functions, what no longer works, and what needs to change. And so what that leads us to is taking responsibility for our own life. Pluto in Capricorn, taking responsibility for your own actions, accepting responsibility for your life, for your role, for your obligations. Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, you can be rebelling against some of this stuff. You may be someone who doesn't want to take responsibility when Pluto goes retrograde in Capricorn, and throw all that stuff off. You may be someone who is too responsible. And when Pluto goes retrograde in Capricorn, it is necessary to throw off responsibilities that are no longer yours or that no longer serve your soul. Pluto in Capricorn is where we face hormonal and gender issues. Cancer Capricorn. Cancer is known as the mother, the female. Capricorn is known as a father and the male. And so we find that the entire cardinal Grand Cross, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, will all relate to hormonal and gender issues. There's a stronger role for it in the Cancer-Capricorn polarity. And one of the things that EA looks at, if you see a chart of a soul and they have Pluto in the 4th or 10th house, this is a soul that either has recently underwent a gender change or maybe is reaching the point where it needs to change genders in the next life. All these little Pluto and Capricorn souls coming in, it is not an absolute that they've all changed genders, but it will be a generational souls that will deal with gender issues. Just look at Pluto's transit in Capricorn 2008 through 2014 and look at how the whole LGBT issue has changed. Here's an interesting tidbit for you. This was in our local newspapers. There was a local person in Rapid City, South Dakota, which we're only a community of 70,000 people, and we live in a pretty redneck, right-wing, conservative state. I just happen to have been raised here and I live in the mountains. That doesn't mean I conform to it, Capricorn, nor does Leroy, Capricorn. However, we had an article in our local newspaper, somebody who, they live in Denver now, a gentleman who worked in the local police department, worked somewhere in the local education department, always inwardly felt like he was female, but was conditioned to be a male. He got married. He had 3 children. And somewhere, I think, in the last, let's say 5 to 8 years, he got kidney stones. And he ended up having an MRI. And the MRI showed that he was, oh gosh, Laura, you're going to have to help me, hermaphrodite. He had both the male and female organs. And so it was a shock to him to learn this. And he kept it a secret for a while, and finally, with the support of his wife, they've been married 26 years now, he decided that he was going to accept his female side because that is where he felt most comfortable. So it didn't break up the marriage. He actually told his wife he would be willing to just continue to suppress it and be the male, and she said, no, I love you as a soul, no matter what. And so they are now together as two females, and he is in process of undergoing hormonal therapy and eventually will do the surgeries to remove the male genitalia. So this is some of the things that come up with Pluto and Capricorn. Not for everybody, but it's almost like Pluto is taking this issue out of the closet. Pluto going retrograde in Capricorn could bring it out of the closet even more, could bring it up for people even more. It could bring it to the surface. And of course, Pluto in Capricorn is going to bring up lessons and issues about parenting. What is responsible parenting? What are the familial values, structures, judgments that we have been conditioned with by our parents? How have we forwarded those on to our children? Are those values and judgments evolving and changing? When Pluto goes retrograde in Capricorn, again, throws this to the surface. Well, we think this is a familial value, but I don't. We have that going on quite strongly in our world with a teenager who has decided to drop out of high school 2 months before he graduates. And the family is all over the place. 3 sets of families. And so the extended family is quite active right now, and everybody's values and everybody's ideas and opinions about what should be done with this teenager. And so Leroy and I, as parents, are Pluto turning stationary retrograde. You know, Leroy this morning is, I'm so tired of talking about this. I'm so tired of addressing this. Here it is, front and center, as Pluto's changing directions. And as this has been building up in the last week, family has become even more involved. And we're dealing with a spiritualized perspective, and we have within our extended family individuating and consensus perspectives. So all of those are thrown up topsy-turvy all over the place. Roy has Pluto in Capricorn transiting the 7th house, which squares that 4th, 10th. And so all of the relationship changes that he is undergoing with different family members. Thank you for allowing me to share this, honey. Pluto in Capricorn brings up lessons in mortality. Capricorn rules space, time. And so when it's retrograde, it can emphasize a sense of mortality within ourselves or family members. It will naturally or necessarily bring up social responsibilities towards elders. Leroy and I are blessed to have 4 parents yet. Mother in the late 70s, and our other 3 parents are early 80s. And my mother is dealing with my father and dementia, most likely early Alzheimer's. And they had a crisis last week over something that happened, and my dad in absolute denial. My dad has a natal 10th house Pluto in Cancer. My dad's a Libra rising, everything's opposite, and he's in complete denial that he has any type of memory issues going on. Stay tuned, we'll see how they solve that. Many times when an outer planet turns stationary retrograde, when it turns direct, you can see a possible resolution of the issue. That's the natural time frame for it, not that it can't happen earlier in the retrograde cycle, and not that you can't go into denial of it and just ignore the resolution when Pluto goes direct. That slow, non-cataclysmic evolution that we have when we are stuck in being secure. And I've always thought my father is probably about third consensus evolutionary state. So Pluto in Capricorn is also going to deal with the evolution of society itself and its responsibilities as society. Familial, cultural, religious, economic, all of the societal responsibilities get thrown up in the air when Pluto goes retrograde, or at least come to some type of building issue or crises that needs to be dealt with and slowly but surely evolved. I'll talk more on that collective a little later. One of the things that I thought I'd do is, because everybody always wants to know their own, what about me, what about me? I did go through Pluto and Cap through the houses just in bullet points, okay? One more slide before that, though. When we have Pluto in Capricorn and Saturn in Scorpio, we have what astrology calls a mutual reception. We have two planets in each other's sign of rulership. So I jotted down what I thought were some of the negative and positive bullet points. If we look at the distortions of this mutual reception, there's an increase in the need to control others and society and our environment. Again, both Pluto and Saturn have a need to be secure and in charge and in control, and you put the two of them together and they can be a powerhouse. And whatever we've built up so far in the structures of society, don't rock my boat. So, for instance, with the haves and have-nots, the 1% and 99%, the 1% is not going to give up its control unless the 99%, which is the community, the people, the Cancer polarity to Pluto and Cap, all right, unless they demand it. And I think that's some of the things we will see in the coming years through the rest of this Pluto and Capricorn transit. We'll see extremes with money and resources. I just saw some headline about a couple who spent $19 million on a wedding, and the performance anxieties of the super rich. I'm like, holy Toledos, $19 on a wedding, or $19 million on a wedding. Now, is that the distortions of extremes with this mutual reception? Yippers. Especially when most of the world tries to get by on $1 a day or something like that. You'll see distortions with sexuality. You'll see abuses. South Dakota, believe it or not, happens to be a state where sexual trafficking is becoming more and more front page news, and it's becoming a societal issue that our state is needing to deal with. South Dakota, by the way, is a Scorpio. We will also see relationship control games, power over, power under, not just intimate relationships. You can see this in work relationships. You can see it in almost all kinds of relationships between these two planets. So the worst of the worst becomes worse. Scorpio, Pluto, extremes. And some of that abusive worse is the extremes of control. Now, if we want to look at it on a more positive level with this mutual reception, it's about letting go of these old reality structures that no longer serve us. And that means letting go of some old relationship patterns, old relationship values, and letting go of perhaps relationships that are no longer serving us. The Cancer and Taurus polarities are going to mean that we have to search for deeper levels of self-empowerment. Instead of power over, power under, it's inner power, self-empowerment. And then when we are self-empowered, we don't have to control others. We work to empower others. So we turn that relationship energy into a positive expression of being helpful to others, helping others move up the economic ladder, sharing resources with others, learning to treat sexuality as a sacred act again. And so empowering people to be able to say no to the sexual distortions and abuses, and saying yes to healthy expressions of sexuality. Even in the LBGT movement, that recognition from the deeper perspectives of learning to love the soul first, the body second, and a deeper perspective of recognizing with reincarnation and doing gender switches that it may take a lifetime or two for some souls to feel comfortable in the other gender. So it can come in all kinds of ways, and being able to accept that diversity and empower someone personally rather than forcing them to conform. So on a collective level, as Pluto is waning to Capricorn, and we'll have a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn in 2020, and I know it's in the later degrees. It's going to come in 2020, and I want to say it's like 19, 20, 21 degrees. I don't remember that right off the top of my head. Between now and then, we're going to continue to have all of these old structures to be released. And the question becomes, how strong do the cataclysms have to be for those that don't want to let go of the old forms and structures that no longer serve us on a collective level? This is why, again, I think we can see more of these financial upsets coming. We think we've temporarily moved beyond it, but when you look at the astrology, you look at it to the United States chart, you just look at how we have put together monetary systems. They're not sustainable, right?
Saturn Pluto's conjunction, Kim, is indeed in 2020 at 23 degrees Capricorn.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that tidbit. So you're a quiet group. If anybody needs questions or comments, you're willing to speak up, but this is perhaps a somewhat familiar subject for many of us. So here's what I decided to do, rather than trying to go in depth on any charts. I put together some bullet points, and again, as you're looking at this and you want more information, if you're new to the world of evolutionary astrology, or you just want to study this more in depth, I do recommend the Pluto and Capricorn workshop, 26 hours of this information, and we spend 2 hours on each of these houses and go in depth. Because part of the involution process with Pluto and Cap, when the old structures just are no longer sustainable, that involution, another word for that is depression or weariness. So as you look at Pluto and Capricorn transiting through whatever house you have it in, Where is it collapsing on you? Where are you feeling depressed and weary? Where are you feeling like you can no longer go on? What are the issues that are being raised for you? The other thing to look at with Pluto and Capricorn is there is sometimes this need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's the cardinal modality. Cardinal is initiating, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, trying to go forward in new directions. And Pluto in Capricorn says, don't throw out every old structure yet. It's still there. You need it to sustain you. There's a process. Pluto's in Cap 15 years. There's a process of letting go of these old structures as you build up the new ones. So it's a little of both, letting go of the old, building up the new, letting go of the old, building up the new. Cataclysms mean you're not building the new, and you're trying to totally defend and maintain the outworn structures. So as Pluto goes retrograde in Capricorn, in each of our houses, this is a time period where the unconscious is made conscious. It comes up in our face, and we get to deal with it. So I just jotted down some bullet points. There's no rhyme or reason between a distortion versus a natural expression. I tried to put a little bit of both in them. So Pluto is retrograde in your first house. This is Pluto, Mars, Saturn, Capricorn. These are the 3 planets that are now retrograde as of today. Mars retrograde March 1st through May 19th. Saturn retrograde, March 2nd through July 4th. And now we have Pluto joining it. So if you have a Pluto in Cap ascendant and Pluto's went over that ascendant and into that first house, you just by nature of the blending of these 3 archetypes are really going to be feeling the pressure here. This is rebirthing your self-identity or having an identity crisis. We could have the physical body breaking down in some way and a need to rebuild it. And in the first house, there's such a defensiveness and such a need to have absolute freedom to just be in charge of everything in your world. And Pluto and Cap's coming along and going, oh yeah, let us show you who's in charge. And so to let go of that defensiveness and really be able to reach over to that polarity and listen. Capricorn rising, you can have career startovers. And talk about self-responsibility, first house. Your entire structure of your world is in process of rebirthing. You have Pluto and Capricorn going retrograde in the second house. It can build up those resource fears, issues around security. Do I have enough resources? Am I secure? One of the things that can happen is we can lose resources during this transit because those resources no longer serve us. Well, we don't feel that way. We just feel the fear. We just want the security back. So there can be literal survival fears. And we can have survival fears that are internalized. We're not in danger of surviving. But Pluto retrograde in Cap can feel that way. And so we can sometimes have to watch that hoarding versus that 8th house polarity being able to share. And of course, it's going to bring up gender issues, sexuality issues. We can have sexual suppression, Capricorn. And so, just like the story I brought out earlier, you could find out you were born with both sets of genitalia unexpectedly. Could be other examples of it. The real biggie with this house transit is rebirthing security from within. All the earth houses, I am more than my stuff. When we look at it through the 3rd house, there has to be a maturation process with how we communicate, how we process information, how we, give and take in the whole communication arena. I find Pluto in Cap through the third, there's a career diversity that you're having to learn. And you can be stuck in one career, or you can be that jack of all trades, master of none. And so, as Pluto does these retrograde cycles year after year in the third house, sooner or later, something is going to erupt in that world of career that says, where's your flexibility? How well can you entertain new ideas? Sometimes we think of that third house Gemini as being all over the place, but there also is the flip side of that where Gemini is stuck in one opinion, one idea, and they'll repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. And so Pluto in Capricorn is going to come in and break that down. And there can be gender confusion. That third house is, because it is the duality, this or that. It is mutable air. And so it can lead to the uprising of confusion around gender issues and what to do about it. We have to have that third house release its know-it-all tendencies. This is a Gemini-Sag thing. Sag thinks it knows it all, and Gemini goes in and finds the weak link. But what Gemini is doing with that weak link is wanting to always have that last word. And so that ability to just, again, mature the thought process. And you can find an exposure of where you're stuck with Pluto's turning retrograde. As we look at it through the fourth house, this is where Capricorn is on the opposite house of what it naturally rules. And so with this Pluto transit, you're going to have to rebirth your self-image. You can have all kinds of suppressed emotions. You have a question, Leroy? Or a comment?
Not germane to this subject, so go ahead and continue.
Okay, sorry about that. I can hear when you unmute, so I stop. When we have Capricorn on that fourth house cusp, again, there can be all kinds of suppressed emotions. There can be all these childhood wounds. We can be stuck in them. And so this Pluto transit is requiring us to grow up, to go through that emotional maturation process, to face whatever's there on a familial issue. We have to find a way to be safe in our world. So the Pluto retrograde will throw these kind of things up into the air. And again, Pluto retrograde makes everything unconscious conscious. You have an opportunity to look deeper and see it deeper than you have before. So make the effort. So why did I choose this family? Why was I born into this? What is Pluto really trying to help me learn on a deep psychological level so that I can go through a maturing however I need to? Now, something else about the Cancer Capricorn axes is the whole thing of what we call physical touch. And so there can be a need to learn safe touching. Pluto, ruler of Scorpio, and all of those extremes that can come in, and the abuses that can come from, perhaps some type of incest or just some type of inappropriate touching, including sexually. So Pluto in Capricorn can bring up this type of issue, and nothing happened in this life. It's a past life issue. All of this stuff as we go through, as Pluto transits the houses, it'll bring up these archetypes from past lives. And that's where it really takes a certain amount of ability to address them, and address them in a variety of different ways. Obviously, with reincarnational astrology, some type of past life therapeutic work can be an option here. But you can find it just as simply as having an ability to relearn safe touch, which is non-sexual touching. And that can be a way to heal any of those sexual wounds if those are also there. All right, I'm working my way through these kind of fast, and again, this is not an inclusive on each of the houses. This is just a couple of keywords. I spent 26 weeks doing these 12 houses, so for me to go through it in about 20 minutes, all right. Pluto Capricorn, turning retrograde in the 5th house. It is about learning how to accept our role in the world versus wanting to be in control of it. This is the Sun house. This is the life force. This is, I want to be the CEO. I want to be the ruler, the king. I want to be the one in charge, the director of the play, as EA will call it. And this is where you're going to have to know what you are and what you're not, who you can be and who it's not possible to be. So there can be creative blocks in order to mature the talents. It's not you projecting your talents out onto the world. It is this transit going, what does the world need that I have the talent for? Different perspective. This can be a transit in which we want to control everything. We want to control love to feel safe. And we have got to learn how to love ourselves rather than trying to force it on someone else outside of ourselves. As a matter of fact, there can be alienation from others so that we mature into that self-love. The opposite of wanting to be in charge and notice me is a fear of being noticed. This is also one of the archetypes within the 5th house, Leo and the Sun. We always think that there's a sense of egotism, and sometimes there's a lack of it. And so it's possible that that Capricorn maturation process is learning to step into a creative role. We can also find that, this is known as the house of play and fun. Whew, put Capricorn there, and no time for that. And so Pluto retrograde may expose how there's no balance in our life here. There's a necessity to learn how to play. There's a necessity to learn how to bring joy in. Pluto Capricorn going through the 6th house. There's a double guilt signature. So this is evolving the guilt complexes and evolving that inferiority, superiority. I'm not pronouncing words today. Superiority complex. And of course, here we are, double Earth signature again, and with Virgo, the 6th house, there is this crises buildup to create change. And with the Capricorn control, we can just be tired. Tired of the crises, tired of the control issues, tired of work, tired of being so responsible. And so Pluto in Capricorn is here to throw it up into the air, to blow it to smithereens and go, where's your balance? Where's your ability to sometimes walk away from work? So this is, again, where health issues can come up because I gotta be responsible, I gotta be responsible, I gotta be responsible, and you burn yourself out. You can create a mental breakdown here. You can create a physical breakdown here. And so there's the maturation process here is the soul learning to accept itself as it is, in its imperfections, and then working on self-improvement as it is natural and able to do so, versus how it feels pressured to do so by society. All right, I'm at the halfway point. Is this working for everybody? Pluto in Capricorn, as it goes through the 7th house, here's where we're going to throw out all the old relating patterns and inequalities that no longer work for us. This is where relationship patterns are going to have to mature. And if we're on the suppressed side, and we suppress feelings which are Libra, we will need to speak up. If we were projecting everything out there, you're going to come back at us. You know, Libra sometimes wants to put that smile on its face and just pretend that everything is fine. There can be a denial of what's real, Capricorn. And so Pluto retrograde is going to throw reality in our face. You think it's XYZ and it's ABC in your relationships. So the maturing is accepting self-responsibility in our relationships. This is my role, and this is what I have to do for myself. And I can't expect my partner to do this XYZ for me, nor should I be burdening myself to do ABC all the time for my partner. So there's going to be this slow, progressive change. Again, Pluto transits are long. Retrograde allows us that consciousness to recognize what's coming up to change. Sometimes with that Capricorn on the 7th house cusp, there's a role rigidity. I have to be in control, or my partner has to be in control. And so that is now shifting. And you can either do it in a non-cataclysmic way or a cataclysmic way in each of these 12 house transits. Pluto and Cap going through the 8th house. It's almost like that mutual reception we talked about earlier between Pluto and Saturn. Whoa, talk about control. Control, control, control. And it's all because the level of control in that outer world is equal to the level of fear underneath. That fear of losing control. And that's a generality for Capricorn. All right, Capricorn in general fears to lose control. Excuse my burp, I apologize. And yet, the Cancer polarity is about losing control and going inward to accept the inner emotions, inner securities. There can be fear of exposure here because of that, sense of security. You need to be in charge. There can be a fear of being exposed about something. It could be sexually, it could be resources, it could be the partner having an affair, and all of a sudden it is brought to our attention. And of course, as you're looking at these words, there's power struggles and there's loss of power with this transit. And it can explode when Pluto goes retrograde. I forgot the S in sexual. The whole sexual expressions. Sexual suppression, excuse me, and distortions, that can all be taking place with the Capricorn there. And when Pluto goes retrograde with this transit, something is exposed, something comes up, and it's coming up to be addressed and healed. The exposures are because something is not natural and it needs to be exposed for the most part. resource lessons again, because this is the natural house of shared resources. Now, Pluto transiting through Capricorn, it can be as simple as getting an inheritance. Or it can be losing your resources if you've used it in a past life. Or you're being underhanded in this life. Again, the extremes go both directions in all 12 houses. But the essence here is re-empowering ourselves on a deeper inner security level. Releasing that outer control and reaching for inner security, that inner empowerment that we talked about with that mutual reception. Ninth house, when we have Capricorn on that ninth house, there can be a dogma or a limitation in our belief systems, and Pluto's going to open that door to evolution of our beliefs. Now, an archetype to Jupiter ninth house Sag is alienation. All right? And alienation is to get us to step outside of our world and ask those larger philosophical questions. And so there can be alienation with this transit and retrograde that is necessary to help us with that maturation process, especially if we want to be controlling of others and their beliefs. Maturity is allowing each to have their own belief system, allowing everybody to put their world together as it makes sense for them. This transit is not just dogma with belief systems, it's dogma on all levels. All right? The lesser evolved ninth house is really going to buy into societal structures and dogmas, from how we educate ourselves to how we process laws in our world, you know, to what books should be published and or banned. You know, dogma on all levels is going to be exposed and broken down here, so that we again expand awareness, expand our understandings of the world. Another thing with this transit is always looking for greener pastures, always running away from an issue instead of being responsible. And so there can be something about this transit and even this retrograde cycle where we are somehow forced to be responsible, to put down those roots, to remain in one place long enough to mature and understand ourselves better. Ninth house is where we can, if we're not in our truth, we're compensating. And so those compensations can be exposed. And we then have to face new levels of truth about ourselves, which has us then maturing. 10th house transit, it's everything we've been talking about on this webinar. The whole self-responsibility issue, career evolutions, maturing. What is our healthy role in society? What are the gender issues that are coming up? Just like we talked about in the 4th house, they'll be the same in the 10th house. There can still be perhaps an incest issue or a touch issue. There could be a confusion of gender issue or a wanting to switch. And making peace with the past in order to free up the future. That's a good concept, and that's a general concept with Pluto in Capricorn. Making peace with the past and putting it to rest, so that it's no longer being carried around like a heavy baggage, and we can be free to move forward in new directions. The career stuff, of course, can be all over the place. We can have, you know, we can be downsized. We can have, huge career exposures. We can have, you know, um, promotions. We could decide to start a business. It goes from one direction to the next. What is your own context? What is your own environment? What is your own structure of reality in any of these houses that then shows you where you need to look at that reality, face that reality, and accept that, and then what is there that is possible to change. In our last two houses, Pluto Cap, retrograde in the 11th, we can run into resource shock and trauma as well. Capricorn, okay? The 11th house adds in the shock and trauma factor. We can be so Capricornian structured that it's got to be a cataclysm to move us out of our mental air house, to move us out of our patterns. 11th house can have a lot of rigid thinking, and we may need to learn to step out of that and look at it from a larger perspective, that objectivity. So Pluto in Cap, when it goes retrograde, there may need to be some type of revolution in our life. Classic with the 11th house is a lot of creative ideas and not doing anything about them. So your world could break down until you are forced to do something about your life. 5th house polarity. Strong need to control things, again, because of the trauma signature that'll come from the 11th. Sometimes you can have extremes of elitism with Capricorn and the 11th house. And there may be something that breaks down in that regard in order to affect more equality. On a more positive note, you may find that this transit is bringing opportunities for responsible leadership. It's not always going to be about falling apart in any of these 12 archetypes. Sometimes you've been putting in that prior effort, Capricorn, doing the work, making the effort, and boom, Pluto is going to bring it forward for you. We have to be careful of shutdowns with this house. Again, the sense of trauma, the sense of I'm not safe. So this can be another house of issues with mental breakdowns or nervous system breakdowns because there's no sense of stability, little Capricorn, in our world or in our environment. And so then we've got to go over to that Cancer 5th house polarity, and really learn to self-trust again. And that'll help us kind of take a larger viewpoint or picture of our world. Finally, Capricorn, 12th house cusp, Pluto moving through that 12th house. There can be a lot in our unconsciousness that's suppressed. And this transit is going to bring it to the surface. We're going to become aware of the ways in areas in which we've got to control or be rigid or, fearful of the world. And boy, you got Capricorn 12th, you're going to have to let go of the control. Or it will be taken away from you, Pluto. There's a surrender to higher power that has to take place here. Now, the depression can come in any of the 12 houses. All right? It will show up in the 12th house and Capricorn when we are not letting go of the desires and the nature of our world that no longer serves our soul. We can be overwhelmed with everything in that outer world because the 12th house makes us so sensitive. We're so sensitive to ourselves, to others. We want to clamp it down. Pluto goes retrograde, and we're just so aware of what's going on all around us that sometimes instead of Capricornian extremes of boundaries, there's no boundaries. And then that, that can be part of that overwhelming. And so we've got to create. Sometimes this house transit, there's a necessity to create a healthy boundary. And of course, there's a lot that's going to depend upon our spiritualization process, our trust in a higher power, our trust in source, our trust in the world. And then it will be easier to let go of the outworn structures and be a little easier to be left in that void sometimes as we're learning to create more, as we're learning to embrace the new desires and the new structures coming through. So that ability to have an inner relationship with Source will say a lot to how this Pluto Capricorn transit takes place and how we learn then to trust our inner and outer world. We can avoid reality with this house transit. And there can be some level of needing to face reality. What is real, not what's out there in the Neptunian, fantasy world. What is real? Pluto and Capricorn would be two archetypes that brings it on down for that 12th house. All right, that was quick. I hope this has been helpful for some of you. I have a little more to go yet, but let me pause at this point. I need some water. Questions, comments? All right. Board must be quiet, or Leroy's answering questions. Okay.
Yeah, well, we just have, you're right on for a couple of people here that I'm interacting with on the Q&A board, so thank you for the information.
Sure, you bet. Again, more detail on this stuff. I really break it down between familial and career and all that stuff on the Pluto and Cap workshop, which is in section 1 and section 3 of the Astro Library. I wanted to address this retrograde cycle a little bit from a collective level for this last half hour. So, on a collective level, all souls are undergoing a cycle of maturation process relative to each of our own environments. And as we're all doing that, and as we're each all learning, to discipline ourselves, to grow up, self-determination, taking charge for our world, then this is evolving society itself. And so what happens then, we're all learning how to, we're learning how to evolve ourselves as an individual within our society. And so then all societies are undergoing evolution. All countries are undergoing evolution. Different groups learning to take charge of their own destinies. So what this will bring up on a collective level is lessons in social responsibility for each society, each culture, each country. And then how we interact with other countries and other societies. The United States, I don't know the details, I just barely heard a little glimpse of it. The United States had another mass killing today, and they have already determined that it was a hate crime. One religion, I think, taking attacking another. I don't know the details. I was just hearing it on briefly on the news tonight. And so when Pluto goes retrograde in Capricorn, if we're not in that maturation process, we can be stuck in all of those emotional distortions and the emotional immaturities, the victimizations. We can do this individually as well, but we can do this as groups of people. All we have to do is look at what every the situation between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. I spoke to it a little bit in the Cardinal Grand Cross for this month in that webinar, but you know, Vladimir Putin has a chart with Pluto conjunct the South Node on top of the midheaven. He is a power horse and power hungry. And then he's got all these planets in, I think Libra planets in the 12th house that has him doing these power grabs behind the scenes, or like the Wizard of Oz effect. And so that's just one example of it. To me, the one that's really been on for my soapbox is the whole financial situation. Are we going to be countries that have public central banking systems where the country creates its money and interest is returned back to the government for the good of society? Or are we going to be private central banking systems where private entities have control of creating the money? It's loaned to the government at interest, which the taxpayers have to pay back. That's how it exists in several areas. And I don't know why my thing is going out here. This is strange. This hasn't ever happened to me before. And so if you're interested in that, well, I wanted to speak to this. I thought, I don't quite have the time. I'll touch upon it, but I do have a couple of slideshows at the end for some other webinars that I've already done to find more information about it. Basically, what we have going on here is that this current Pluto cycle that we're in started in April of 1822. And if you want to look at the modalities of it, modality is the mode of operation. And there's three modalities: cardinal, fixed, mutable. And so when we take that circle of 12, we have three complete cycles of modalities. For instance, Pluto in Libra, cardinal, Scorpio, fixed, Sag, mutable, from 1971 to 2008. That was a 40-year cycle. It was a modality cycle of evolving outer relationships and cosmological understandings of life. As Pluto moved into Capricorn in 2008, it started a new modality cycle. And this one is expanding societal frameworks until society reverses itself the next time Pluto goes into Aries in 2066. So we're looking at 60 years here of dealing with how society is structured, Capricorn, how society wants to revolutionize itself, Aquarius, and then how society is going to find the deepest understandings of life possible. And every time Pluto goes retrograde, it will stir this energy up. And during that 5 months that it is retrograde, it's going to bring up these questions. It's going to be throwing off things on a collective level as well. It's going to be accelerating that evolutionary process of any group of people, no matter what country they operate in. Keep in mind, again, 7 out of 10 are consensus, and That's why there's this tendency for society to repeat itself all the time. Now, Pluto is in Capricorn again, 2008 to 2023-24. Now, following Sag, what this represents is every soul learning how to link our own philosophy and identity within the framework of society. And so on a collective level, every society, every country has had its philosophies evolving through Pluto and Sag. And now they're trying to take that evolving philosophy or understanding of life in the world and the planet and 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 put it into function into society. And so again, Capricorn's the cardinal modality. This is why so much is breaking down in the structures of society and why we have to rebuild things. And when you look at Capricorn in the natural zodiac, it is the last quarter square to Aries. And so in this case, back to the 1820s, it was in the 1820s that we had one of the last in 1993, and I want to say it was 1821, I think, we had Uranus conjunct Neptune in Capricorn. And so the 1820s, it wasn't the start of the industrialized revolution, but it was when the industrialized revolution really took off. That Uranus Neptune conjunction in Capricorn was the initiation of this, and there was so much social displacement as machines took over doing what people had done for hundreds of years. And Pluto was in Aries at that time. That's when there were mass migrations. Aries, everybody just picking up and wanting to move somewhere else. Now here we are 3/4 of the way around that last cycle. Then there's a crisis in consciousness about jobs again relative to today. All right, look at how far those machines have come since the 1820s, and we continue to either have downsizing because a machine does it and we don't need the human to do it anymore, or it shifts from one country to another country. In the case of the United States, it's shifting those jobs overseas. And so the United States, for instance, is having a crisis in consciousness over how we look at this whole middle class and doing a decent day's labor for a decent day's wages. Is that the same cliche? You know, and that stuff is just all breaking down. And so we'll look at this over the next 60 years, and there will be so much turmoil and so much change that'll go on with this. Not to mention just adding in the whole issue of climate change to all of this. So again, these 5 months that Pluto is retrograde is a time period where all this stuff is thrown out, exposed into consciousness, stirred up. And the purpose of it is to evolve how we are going to operate within any country or society, and how we are going to operate amongst each other. There's a lot that's being said about the United States because this Pluto in Capricorn and this particular Pluto Cap retrograde cycle is the first time in the entire history of the United States where Pluto is opposing the Sun. So the United States is having an identity crisis. I spoke about this in a little more detail in the Cardinal Cross. Well, I've been speaking about this in quite a few public webinars. And so, some of you may have seen this slide before. This Cardinal Grand Cross is hitting the U.S. Sun-Saturn square quite strongly this year. And we've talked about the Mars retrograde. and drawing lines in the sand or learning how to negotiate. We've come off of this Jupiter retrograde. We've got Uranus to go yet. And now Pluto's entering this picture. And I've showed this slide before. This particular Pluto retrograde cycle is where the red oppositions to the sun are. These are the 3 oppositions to the sun. We've had the first one. So you might want to pay attention to mid-June and see what's going on when Pluto reverses back the second time opposing the U.S. sun. International listeners, thank you for letting me use this example. And then we'll have one more opposition later when Pluto's direct. Next Pluto retrograde cycle, the squares to the sun will be active in next year. So just briefly, I've showed this before. These oppositions to the sun, look at some of the things we've been talking about with Pluto and Capricorn. All the gender issues, you know, the extremes that seem to be going on there, the states trying to pass the laws, you know, that they can be prejudiced against gays, lesbians, etc. Yeah, for the most part, I think on a broader level, we're seeing progression with that. It's the financial issues that I think are the weakest. There's such extreme between the haves and the have-nots, and the BRIC countries, BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, they are underfoot to basically pretty much devalue the dollar. A lot of the times when the U.S. goes to war, it's to save the dollar or to keep the dollar as the medium of worldwide trade interchange. And we're having groups like Russia and China getting together and say, well, we're not going to trade the dollar as we exchange back and forth. It can really shake things up. This is why I'm very proactive in the public banking movement. I have a slide on that for you coming. Very proactive in the public banking movement to really get back to grassroots public banking so that we're not so dependent upon these haves and have-nots. Constitutional issues, fine, marijuana, the healthcare, you know, all of these are up in the air, the climate issues, all this stuff. Some of it we're seeing this Pluto and Capricorn breakdown with progression. Some of it we're seeing Pluto and Capricorn hang on to the control for everything as hard as it can, and it's kind of stay tuned with each Pluto retrograde cycle in Capricorn from here to 2024. It's just going to be moving through to break another one down, and it's just that it's breaking down because it's not sustainable anymore. The extremes, Pluto and Cap, are not sustainable. The patriarchal extremes are not sustainable. And so that's why it will break down, and sometimes it will be a necessary breakdown. I have put these slides in, but I'm just going to be very brief with them. You know, when you're working with Pluto retrograde, you don't have a lot of other planetary aspects unless you go to the faster moving planets. So Mars is making the waning squares to Pluto. Some of you may have seen this before as it's going through its retrograde cycle. This is part of this April activity, accepting responsibility for our relationships, letting go of the patterns in the relationships that no longer work for us. Jupiter is the oppositions to Pluto. And to me, this is what we've been talking about, patriarchy versus matriarchy, whether we're going to exclude or include. And again, as what I see, that Cancer polarity to Pluto and Capricorn is community and grassroots. It is the power to the people. It is the collective that have to rise up and create change between all the have-nots with Pluto Cap. And of course, we all know about the Uranus waxing squares to Pluto, the deeper undercurrents going on here. That for all of the Pluto and Capricorn breakdowns and structures, and in the mutual reception of Saturn to Pluto, increasing that breakdown, Uranus is waxing. Uranus is building the new. For everything that breaks down, there's a new way to do it. And so Uranus is going to continue to, I think, gain momentum in technology, in social media versus corporate media, in all the different innovations and ways in which we are going to be able to do things. The danger is technology getting ahead of spirituality. That's always one of the problems we have. We can race ahead with technology before society has had an ability to incorporate it into the social structures. We'll see how that one unfolds. But this is, again, the base note. We are still evolving and building. So you can look at your own chart and look at where Pluto is collapsing something or wearing it down. And Uranus in Aries will show you how you are also responding to that and building anew. Now, this was that Cardinal Grand Cross that I just went through those planets, so I won't take time with this slide. Here's the books really if you're interested in looking at this Pluto and Capricorn cycle. When Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008, and we had that financial meltdown pretty much worldwide, I decided I needed to educate myself financially. And so these are the three books that are my favorites. Robert Gover, this is the second edition of his book on time and money. He is great at giving the history of everything. He feels that these Pluto-Uranus squares to the Sun-Saturn are going to be part of this breakdown through the rest of this decade. And Neptune will come along in early next decade and oppose itself and square Mars. And anytime that happens, there's historically been not stock market crashes. I'm trying to remember what that was. There was something else. It might be the stock market crashes. Yeah, it was. It's stock market crashes. Now, Ellen Brown is my favorite for public banking. Now, publicbankinginstitute.org. They're expanding their website, and I've been reading some great things about them. They are really gaining momentum. They're starting a new area on their website, which is breaking down monetary policies and making them simple to understand. And they have if you live in the United States, they have a grassroots momentum. There are 25 states now that are organizing to create public state banks. So the money goes, so states don't send their money to Wall Street, it stays on Main Street, and the interest is kept in-house. The prime example of that is the Bank of North Dakota. And since 1919, they have required all of their state income and assets to be dealt with through the Bank of North Dakota. And they are literally sitting upon almost $2 billion in assets and running their state government. And that's not the oil money. So I'm not repeating, instead of repeating a lot of stuff that is available on other webinars, I would just invite you, if you want more information on really educating yourself with Pluto and Capricorn and money. Robert Gover and I did 2 webinar lectures last fall, and you need to help me out, Leroy. I think these are in section 3 of the Astro Library, correct?
Yes,
I
and you
think
can
so.
also find them on the 2013 conference pages and purchase them individually.
Sure.
Any questions, just email mediamonk@evolutionaryastrology.net.
Again, it is my personal soapbox. With Pluto's transit through Capricorn, and especially as the retrograde shapes things up, if you have interest in your own prosperity, please educate yourself on how various public entities, social structures create and operate with money and be a part of the solution. There's no need to buy into all the fears, and I do think there can be some chaotic changes that can be going on. Um, Here's the Astro Library. One more day, we have that 25% off. Here's future classes. I'm taking a break in the month of May from public webinar classes because of all the family stuff we got going on. And so I'll be back with 3 of them in June, 3 of them in July. And so there's a heads up for those if you'd like to jot them down. And if there's any questions these last few minutes, I would be happy to answer questions for anybody. I'll monologue for a minute in case you're just looking to see if anybody has questions. Again, what I have done over these last 5 years is I've really, 6 years now, maybe 2008, yeah. You know, who of us didn't buy into the fear when Pluto went into Capricorn and the financial meltdowns and breakdowns that we had? And there was not a real solution that was created through all of this. And so all the things that were in place to create the breakdowns in 2008 are still in place. And we could have that type of financial breakdown again. However, it is not hopeless. As I've really studied the public banking movement and what we would know as matriarchal principles of giving, sharing, including, there's so much hope. And I'm looking at this Pluto in Capricorn transit, the Uranus-Pluto waxing squares, and Pluto in Aquarius as the opportunity for the masses, the public, the community, to educate themselves and really take back their own power, Pluto in Capricorn, and empower others, empower all of us. So be a part of it. Thank you for letting me preach. Any questions, comments? Well, all of you reflect on where your own soul is having to let go of the structures in your life no longer working, the old desires that are no longer serving you. And as Pluto's turned retrograde, and as it is retrograde until the fall equinox, September 22nd, where are you desiring to break free? Where do you want to take charge of your life in new ways? How are you being asked to be responsible, and how are you being asked to create the new structures of consciousness within your soul? I wish you much success. And thank you very much for tuning in.